Not since Alexander of Macedonia had there arisen a king like Antiochus IV. He ruled over the land of Syria with a heavy hand, and the kings of many lands paid him yearly tribute. He built to himself a monument, a mighty city which he named Antioch. But the more power he had, the more he wanted. He was filled with an insatiable hunger to fill the whole world with his glory. "I will conquer the world like Alexander of Macedonia," he boasted. And so foolish was his pride that he called himself Epiphanes, which in Greek means the manifest God, for like the Roman Caesars, he wished that all men worship him as a deity. But the Jews had another name for him. They called him Antiochus the Madman, and to show their opinion of him, they quoted scripture, saying, "Antiochus is a root bearing gall and wormwood." Now it happened that in the 23rd year of his reign, 168 BCE, which was 213 years after the rebuilding of the temple by Ezra the scribe, Antiochus turned his face wrathfully toward Jerusalem, and he said to his generals, "I can no longer endure the Jews that dwell in the land of Israel. I know that in their hearts they hate me and hope for my destruction. They are not like us. They do not sacrifice to our gods, nor do they observe our laws, but speak scornfully of them. Therefore I have sworn that I will bring them low and put the yoke upon their necks." And Antiochus sent a great host against the Jews. They sacked Jerusalem, and they massacred its people, and yet there was no one to stand up against them, for the chief men of the nation remained cowed and silent, and failed to rally the people. The Greeks broke into the temple and robbed it of its treasure. Many Jews fled to Alexandria, and others to Babylonia, to Persia, and to other distant lands. Whomever the Greek soldiers chose, they killed. Women and children they sold in all the slave markets of the world. The walls of Jerusalem they tore down, and made desolate its houses and streets. Antiochus had said to his generals, "Abolish the Torah and all the academies where it is taught from the land of the Jews. Punish with death all those who observe the Jewish customs. I decree that they no longer may circumcise their male infants, and that they may not observe their dietary laws. Compel them to violate the Sabbath, to bow before our gods, and bring their sacrifices to them upon our altars, and send my servants throughout the land to see that this be done." And the generals did as Antiochus told them. They went throughout the entire land of Israel, and they pulled down the synagogues and the houses of study. They defiled and destroyed the Torah scrolls, and slew all who murmured against them. And there were many martyrs who died to sanctify his name, and their blood was on the head of Antiochus. Not long after that, the heathen priests of Antiochus consecrated the temple to their chief god, Zeus, and they raised a great statue of him upon the altar in the sanctuary. In his honor they sacrificed a pig upon the altar, and sprinkled its unclean blood in the sanctuary. And when the people of Israel heard of this, they shuddered with horror, but they dare not murmur aloud, as their lives would be forfeit. So they fled Jerusalem in great numbers, until Zion was a deserted city. Now it chanced that Apelles, a Greek official, came to the village of Modin, which is not far from Jerusalem, to carry out the decree of Antiochus. He raised an altar to the Greek gods, and commanded the Jews to sacrifice a swine upon it. Among those who gathered was Mattathias, an old priest of the Hasmonean clan, and his 5 sons, Johanan, Simon, Judah, Eleazar, and Jonathan. When Mattathias heard what abomination Apelles wished the Jews to perform, he said to them, "O my brothers, let all the nations of the provinces that are subject to King Antiochus obey him if they choose, even to the extent of betraying the religion of their forefathers. But we swear we shall not leave the path of our religion to go either to the right or to the left." With these words he smote Apelles the Greek, and he slew him. Then Mattathias cried out to the Jews, "Take up arms. Whoever is for God and his holy law, let him follow me." He and his 5 sons, and many others of the sect of the Hasidim, or the pious, fled into the hills. In the darkness they would descend on the Greek garrisons, and, although few in number and ill-armed, they slew many, for they were fierce with the hatred of the enemy, and aflame with a love for their people and their God. The time came at last for Mattathias to die, for he was very old. And so he called his 5 sons together and said, "O my sons, I must now depart from you. And so I wish to appoint a leader over you and over our army. I therefore choose you, Judah, my son, to succeed me. For your wisdom and heroic deeds are comparable to Judah, the son of Jacob. Even as he was likened to a lion, so are you. And may our enemies tremble when they feel your strength. Serve God with all your heart and soul, and bring redemption to Israel." Saying this, Mattathias died, and Judah was general in his stead. So invincible was he in battle, so merciless in pursuit of the enemy, that the Jews called him Maccabee, which in Aramaic means hammer, for he struck at the Greeks mightily like a hammer, blow upon blow. And the example of Judah set the hearts of his people aflame. They found new hope and new courage, and many flocked to him in the fastnesses of the hills, and took up arms, and fought with him against the Greeks, for they saw that he was wise, and a great leader of men, and understood the art of war. Also his 4 brothers, Johanan, Simon, Eleazar, and Jonathan, were great warriors. They too led the people to victory, and performed acts of valor. And when those who had fled heard the reports of all this, they took heart and returned to the land of Israel, for they too wished to share in the glory of the sacred struggle. When King Antiochus heard of this, he grew very wrathful, and sent army after army to punish the Jews. But Judah Maccabee swooped down upon them unexpectedly from the hills, fierce as a mountain lion, and crushed them all. Again King Antiochus summoned his generals and said, "Have you heard what Judah Maccabeus has done to me? He has destroyed all my armies and killed their generals. An end must come to this." And so he sent his most cunning generals, Ptolemy, Nicanor, and Gorgias, with a Greek host of 40,000 foot soldiers and 7,000 horsemen, as well as many thousands of Syrian auxiliaries. And they paused at the city of Emmaus, which lies in the plain. There they pitched their camp and waited to give battle to Judah. So confident were they of victory that they brought with them Phoenician slave merchants carrying chains with which to bind the captives. When the Jews beheld the assembled hosts of the enemy, and saw how more numerous they were than their own forces, they were struck with fear. Seeing this, Judah said to them, "Terrible indeed is the might of the Greeks, but more terrible is the vengeance of the Lord when he strikes at the wicked. Fear not the enemy, even though they are many, and we are but few. Know that God is with us, even though we are weak, and our righteous cause will triumph over their greater numbers. Therefore gird your spirits, and strengthen your hearts, and be as men of valor." And so, as was his custom before battle, Judah put on sackcloth and poured ashes on his head, like the veriest penitent. He fasted and sent his supplications winging to God. He also confessed his sins, and his men did as he did. Then they no longer were afraid. After that Judah arose and said to his assembled host, "If there are any among you who are afraid, withdraw then from the battlefield. Also the newly married, and those who have but recently acquired riches, let them depart, for they will fight in a cowardly manner, being full of regret for what they have left behind." When these were gone, Judah drew up his forces in the ancient order of battle of the Jews. He appointed over them captains of thousands, and of hundreds, and of tens. Then he spoke to them as follows: "My fellow Jews, let us fight manfully for the liberty of our people and the honor of our Torah. Should we lose the battle, we shall all be slain, and our wives and children will be sold into slavery. Therefore we must be victorious. Thus we will regain the liberties our enemies have taken from us, and we will be restored to our blessed way of life. Fear not, O Jacob, for the God who led us out of bondage in Egypt will not abandon us." That night the Greek general Gorgias left the main part of his army at Emmaus, and came with 5,000 foot soldiers and 1,000 horsemen to fall upon Judah in the darkness. But Judah encompassed his plan. Now, he felt, he could deal better with his enemies, since their forces were divided. Therefore Judah purposely left many fires burning in his camp, in order to deceive and confuse Gorgias, and then he and his army departed. He marched all night long, and arrived before the town of Emmaus, where was camped the enemy. Judah observed that the Greeks were well and skillfully fortified in their camp, and that their numbers were many times greater than his, for he had come with only 3,000 men. But he took heart, knowing that they were fast asleep, and did not expect him to attack. And when the moment came to strike, Judah commanded the trumpeters to sound the call to battle. When the Greeks heard it, they were astonished and dismayed, for they were certain Gorgias had destroyed the Jews. Judah and his men then fell upon the enemy, who ran hither and thither in confusion and terror, and they slew many of those that resisted them, to the number of 3,000. The rest they pursued as far as Gadara, Ashdod, and Jamnia. Now Gorgias, who had gone in search of Judah and had not found him in his camp, was exceedingly puzzled. So he hastened back to the camp of the Greeks at Emmaus. When he came there and saw what had happened, he and his men turned in fright and fled. Yet for all the defeats inflicted on his armies, Antiochus would not rest. The next year he sent against Judea another host, this time of 60,000 foot soldiers and 5,000 horsemen, under his greatest general, Lysias. Judah met him in the hill country of Beth-sur, with only 10,000 men, and yet he routed him and slew a great multitude of Greeks. Now Lysias was a prudent man. He marked well the spirit of the Jews, for he saw they would rather die than lose their liberty and worship any but their own God, and that Judah inspired them with a heroism and a desperation in fighting that was more than human. Therefore he gathered the remnants of his army, and by forced marches returned to Antioch. This time King Antiochus felt fear in his heart, and he fled to the sea provinces of his kingdom. But wherever he went, the people rose up in revolt against him and mocked at him, saying, "Coward, run away!" Whereupon Antiochus, out of humiliation, cast himself into the sea and was drowned. Upon the departure of the enemy, Judah assembled the people in Jerusalem and said to them, "Let us go up to the house of God and purify it, for it has been wickedly profaned." And after they had carefully purified the temple, and cast out all the idols and their altars, they brought in new vessels, the 7-branched golden menorah, the table of showbread, and the altar of incense. They also pulled down the altar for burnt offerings which had been profaned, and built a new one in its place. And so, on the 25th day of the month of Kislev, Judah rededicated the temple. He lighted the lamps of the menorah, and offered incense and burnt offerings upon the altar. However, when they wished to light the lamps, they went in search of pure olive oil, but they found none except one small vessel of unprofaned oil, which had been closed with the seal of the high priest in the ancient days of the prophet Samuel. The vessel contained oil sufficient for 1 day only, yet a miracle happened. The oil burned for 8 days until new holy oil could be prepared. And in commemoration of the rededication of the temple, Judah Maccabee decreed that on the 25th day of Kislev of each year, the Jews were to celebrate the Festival of Lights, or Chanukah, for 8 days. They were to burn lights during this period, adding a new light each night, and sing songs of praise to celebrate the triumph of Israel in the struggle for its freedom. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.